What are we listening to today?
The Immigrant Project by Girish and Astha.
Welcome to another episode of the Immigrant Project. Today I have Ravi Jain with me. Ravi is a lawyer and the founder of Jain Immigration. And Ravi is also the past co-president of Canadian Immigration Lawyers Association. He's the former chair of Canadian Bar Association. He has been awarded Lawyer of the Year. He's a certified specialist by Law Society of Ontario. And I think, Ravi, you have also practiced or got your degree in Massachusetts as well as Ontario, right?
Well, I got my Master's of Law from University of Michigan, and I'm called to the bar in Massachusetts, and I was past national chair of the CBA immigration section. But that's yeah.
So do you practice in US and Canada both? Or
Yes. I've got a law degree from Canada and a bachelor's degree from Canada. That took me 4 years plus 3 years. And then I did a year-long Master's of Law from the University of Michigan. So 8 years in university.
Wow. So for our listeners, Ravi, can you tell us how you got started, how you entered into the industry as a lawyer, how you founded your own organization?
Well, I was always attracted to immigration law. I like the stories and I like the positive outcomes, that we were able to accomplish for people. Some areas of law can be a little boring. I mean, cutting and pasting corporate documents is not my thing. And criminal law can be a little bit, it can be hard because if you're dealing with people and, there's some ugliness there sometimes. Same thing with family law. People are upset, but immigration generally I found to be, like I say, a good news kind of story. People looking for a better life, people for whom this is the most important thing in their lives. I always remind my team about that. And they're pretty good at remembering that and keeping that in mind as well. But also my father was from India, received the Order of Canada. So he was the highest civilian award in Canada. One of the few, South Asians that have received that. Married my mother, who's American. And so I come from a mixed background and was born here because he was a professor here. And so that kind of has helped me to understand the two worlds, if you will, right? So it helped me litigate when I was litigating a lot of sponsorships and spousal sponsorships and that kind of thing, to understand the perspective of the immigration department, the perspective of the officer who may not have a background and familiarity with the culture, but then also using my own experiences. Going to India many times, my dad's sabbaticals, we went all over the country. I've seen more of India than most Indians. And, just getting to know the people and getting to know the practices, the cultural, traditions, understand things, little things like, someone gets remarried or someone has another relationship and they don't talk about what happened. That's a Western perspective will mean that you know everything about what happened with the previous relationship. And sometimes with Indians, they sweep it under the rug. We don't talk about that. We're just moving on, moving forward, right? So little things like that. That's just one tiny example, but just allowed me to sort of explain, when an officer wanted to make a mountain out of a molehill, we say, which is make a big deal out of almost nothing.
Yeah.
Which they can do in appeals and they can do in applications, and you see the procedural fairness letters. A lot of people are in the Indian community come to me with issues. And then I became passionate with respect to what I was seeing, which was that a lot of people were being harmed because Canada, like other Commonwealth countries, has been experimenting with immigration consultants who are not proper lawyers.
Yeah.
I mentioned my education and what I had to go through. I understand in India, it's not necessarily so difficult to go to law school, but in Western countries, it is extremely difficult. In Canada, anyway. U.S. is a different story, but there's so many schools. But in Canada, you have to have good grades, you have to get a good LSAT and to get in. And then, to do well, et cetera, is not necessarily easy. So there's a rigor there. And then you have to be called to the bar and you have to take the bar admissions course. You have to do an articling year of 1 year, which is an internship. So, people are really well trained and ethics are instilled in them throughout. And they're not going to risk, 4 years of articling plus law school plus another half a year, which is what I did for the bar admissions course. You're not going to risk all that, after just completing a 4-year degree. So talking like 8.5 years, plus my 1 year master's, you're not going to risk 9.5 years or 8.5 years because some guy offers you, some shady something or another. You're just not going to do it. Generally speaking, you have a few bad apples, but generally speaking, the bar is very, very ethical and very professional in how they go about things. So that's not been the experience in Commonwealth countries that have been experimenting with immigration consultants. So a large part of my practice for the past 20 plus years has been dealing with the victims. Who said, "Oh, my lawyer misguided me," and it's like, it's not a lawyer.
It's a consultant.
Yeah, it's a consultant. And, the lawyer, lawyers, when they hear that, they always look it up and say, "Well, you said you went to a lawyer. Let's look it up." And of course, they're not members of a law society. They're usually members of the college, as they call it. Oh. And, it's, there are some that are diligent and try to do their best. But even then, those consultants just don't know what they don't know. And sometimes it can have tragic consequences as well. And then you've got the fraudsters and everyone else. So we see a lot of harm, particularly, I see a lot of stuff where consultants abroad have misrepresented, and the person would have told them about a U.S. refusal, would have told them that they're married, or told them this and told them that. And the consultant just puts whatever they want. And then they get to Canada, and then they're dealing with me, and, they're saying, "Ravi, I don't know what happened, but this was mentioned, this wasn't mentioned." And, it's a nightmare. It's a mess. And they really suffer from it, unfortunately.
Oh, man. Oh, that's unfortunate. Ravi, you said that you have 20 plus years of experience in the practicing law. Mm-hmm. How have you seen the immigration change in Canada, especially in the past 10 years? How would you describe
Well, that? Obviously, there's been a major technology push. So when I was national chair of the Bar Association immigration section, we saw that they were trying to really digitize. So there were applications at the time that were being received in their mailroom, and they couldn't access the mailroom. So it led to a very strong push to digitize. And we're even better than Americans on this. And we do a lot of stuff online. So I think that's been a big change. Mm-hmm. We've also seen changes with respect to the number of temporary residents in particular. In the last 10 years, gone from about 300,000 to about 3 million. So that's been a dramatic increase, and everyone's feeling that. And that's led to a lot of the backlash against immigrants generally. Yeah. And you see people blaming immigrants and particularly temporary residents for the housing crisis, anything from like healthcare wait times to traffic, so this has been a real challenge. And of course, a lot of those international students were lied to by consultants who promised them a guaranteed pathway to PR, right? So it comes back to the consultants a bit. It comes back to mismanagement. The government was drunk on the notion that it's a $23 billion industry. Yeah. And I was writing about this for years, talking about Indian students committing suicide, talking about the fact that they'd, were spending their parents' life savings, that they were duped. They were coming to classes where 99% of their classmates were Indian. And some of them were going to private-public partnerships where the private schools were garbage. A strip mall or a little small section of a building, or, they're having their courses taught in movie theaters because there was greed by the community colleges, by the private colleges to just fill more and more and more seats because they weren't having the provincial funding that they needed, in part, but also because there was just pure greed. So the colleges were in on it, the immigration consultants were in on it, and the victims were the students. So that's been a big change in terms of the rise of temporary residence. Has been a major change. Like, as I say, technology. There's been those are the main ones. Of course, I could talk to you about this for hours, but if I had to pick two, that's what I'd pick.
But one could argue that, since there was a lot of technological change in the way we manage our immigration levels, and Canada has probably the world's one of the best standards of managing immigrations in their country, people would also argue that the processing time should have been improved. But now I understand that, since there's an increase in number of people applying, processing times might increase. But do you think the system is not efficient enough, or do you think?
So I testified in Parliament on this. There was someone had uncovered something through an ATIP, access to information request, and in that they had discovered that there was a time, through COVID, when up to 80% of immigration staff were on leave, right? And so there was a real HR failing, like a lack of managing people, and that was a huge failure. And they just didn't know to pivot, like the private bar did. The private immigration bar, I mean, there were, young children at home. There were moms and dads who were immigration lawyers who had to immediately adapt.
Yeah.
Government officers did not. They were worried about security. They were worried about, some technological challenges that they simply didn't solve, quickly enough. And so a long period of time went by where officers were simply not working like efficiently or properly at all. That led to a massive backlog, which then led to Minister Fraser saying, okay, well, why don't we suspend visitor visa criteria, right? Just because we have a huge backlog and basically just approve everyone and not look at whether they're genuine or not, which led to a massive increase in the refugees, right? So that's it. That's what I mean by mismanagement, right? I mean, the department officials were flagging it. They thought that Minister Fraser and the Prime Minister were a little naive when they were saying, let's just let people come in and, visitors are great. And, they heard a few stories going to different communities about how mom or dad couldn't come to graduation and no, this is terrible. But there's a naivete there because, there was a lot of visitor, visa approvals where people were genuine and they made refugee claims and that led to a backlog, right? And so you had that, then you had, other pressures on the system where they waived the visa requirement for Mexicans. And then the Mexican refugee claims started to go up and up and up and up. So you have that combined with the waiving of the visitor. And then you have now with the situation with Donald Trump and people potentially coming in, to Canada because they don't want to go back and get deported. So this is going to put more pressure on refugee claimants. And then plus, don't forget, you have the students who are being advised by immigration consultants to make refugee claims because they have no hope of staying here. So, all this adds pressure to the system. And again, that's a mismanagement, as I said, because you're so focused on the $23 billion that the students are bringing in. You're not thinking about the welfare of the students and the well-being of the students and whether or not there's room within the annual levels plan to convert them into PR, right? And if you convert them into PR and that, and you're bringing in so many, it's just not a well-managed system, right? So these are the things where, these are some of the pressures that we're facing now on the refugee side, on the number of residents being asked to leave, will they leave? So it's a little bit of a mess.
I've heard the government is saying around 2 million temporary residents needs to leave by the country by the end of this year. I don't know if that's going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen.
Well, Ravi, I had a question to you about Donald Trump's upcoming tariffs. I think he's going to have a conversation with Justin Trudeau today. So we all know that he's going to hit Canada with 25% tariffs. And because of that, a lot of businesses, both north and south of the border, are unhappy with his decision. So have you seen any increase in inquiries where businesses would want to move production across the border?
I think that this threat of tariffs will remain. I mean, people could be watching this, I think, in February. So, talking about what's happening today in later February or March, and we're early February now. But I would just say, excuse me, that, the threat of tariffs is a real one, and it's going to weigh on our economy and it's going to weigh on people's decisions. Will it impact immigration? Yes. But I think what I would like to say here is that, we had ministers who were very concerned about security in the past.
Yeah.
The current crop, the most recent crops have not been as concerned. They've had other focus, like I said, worrying about getting more visitors in without vetting them, in terms of basic visitor visa criteria. They've been bringing in an awful lot of international students and seeing the numbers go up, but not really paying attention to what that could mean. Because, of course, we don't do security screening in the same way as we do for permanent residents. So for students, we had some come in and then there's allegations of terrorist links, etc. So all of that was potentially foreseeable, that this could be an issue for our American friends, right? And it was also foreseeable that Donald Trump could become president and be quite upset about that. So my point here is that by mismanaging the system, it could be this immigration piece could have been a major factor for the tariffs. Like obviously there's a trade imbalance, but there's never been so much of an issue with that because we have so many interprovincial trade barriers. We can't get our oil to the coast, which means we can't get it to Europe or India,
Yeah,
who would love to have it.
exactly. Yes.
So this could be a real time to focus on removing interprovincial barriers if we can do that. But the larger issue is that, tariffs are in part because of trade imbalance. But again, like they've been happy to take our oil for a discount, which is what they get it at, right? So I think these other issues of fentanyl and security of the border have been potentially playing a significant role in President Trump's mind, pre-election and post-election. And he talks about that a lot, maybe more than the trade imbalance. So if we had been a little bit more proactive there, I think we could have saved a lot of harm to the nation. So this is how important immigration can be.
I think if you remove oil out of the picture, I think trade imbalance says itself. I mean, balances itself. Or Canada would have rather more imports than exports.
But they need to. They're voracious consumers of oil, right? And if they can get oil at a discount from us, then what's the problem? I think there's other issues at play here as well. Is my point.
Well, Ravi, we have time for one last question. I want to pick up something that you mentioned in your previous answer. You said that Sean Fraser could have done something different, but now the minister has changed. It's Mark Miller. Do you think he has taken some steps, some good steps, or do you think there's more to do?
Well, I've been calling for the ending of these private colleges for a long, long time. I said we should get rid of them. They shouldn't be allowed to bring in students. I said that if you're going to have it, you should write a letter to every single student when they get their visa to let them know that they don't get a postgraduate work permit, because a lot of consultants were telling them that they're going to get a postgraduate work permit. So I've had all kinds of suggestions over the years. So I was very happy to see that he put so much pressure on the provinces by putting a cap that they had to basically select the community colleges and universities over the private colleges. So I'm happy about that. I think that was a good move. I think he's been very aggressive. I think he's been emboldened by that and the feedback he got on that. And he's been quite aggressive. I mean, some of the stuff he's bringing in, administrative monetary penalties on representatives, I mean, it's totally inappropriate for him to do that to lawyers, because we have a very, very strong law society in each province, right, and territory. So, excuse me. So I think that's totally inappropriate. And I think what is really his concern is about consultants. So I think he should. I think the problem is that the Liberals are the ones that have propped up the third iteration of self-regulation for consultants. The Liberals kind of own that file, and I think they're embarrassed by it. And they've created the college, and now I think that they're trying to continue with the college and continue with having consultants, but they're doing all these draconian things and complaining about LMIAs and removing the points for LMIAs. That's a bad idea, because people need the points for LMIAs. So instead of removing our tools to help people, and removing people who genuinely deserve points, and putting penalties on lawyers potentially, when the real problem is consultants, why don't you deal with the problem? And the problem is immigration consultants. It's not the case now that the immigration bar, the lawyers, are not so diverse or don't speak the language or whatever the issues were in the past. There's lots of immigration lawyers. And, there's lots of them that have various diverse backgrounds. And the public deserves better than to be constantly lied to, by consultants who pretend to be lawyers, say they have law firms, dress in fancy suits, and take in client and all kinds. And then the fraud. I mean, Bansal, there was a report in the Walrus talking about one immigration consultant who's, got tens and millions of dollars. And so the enrichment is just unbelievable. And based on what was reported as quite shady practices. So I think that the parting comment is that the government should really, Mark Miller can be tough, and he should really focus that toughness where it belongs, and by the group that are creating the victims.
Well, this has been very insightful, Ravi. I wish we had more time, and I know you have to leave. So thank you so much for giving us the time. One last question. If anyone has to reach out to you, how best would you think they should connect?
Well, they can find me, at Jain Immigration Law. So I'm at Ravi at jainimmigrationlaw.com or info at jainimmigrationlaw.com.
Thank you so much, Ravi, for your time today.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.